going on for many, many generations, right? So today, you know, you guys, when you reach voting age, you can go and vote. It's not a big deal, right? You know, it's really, it's here, but it wasn't like that 100 years ago, right? It wasn't like that 200 years ago. So, just speaking to the power that women have had to fight for, you know, it wasn't given to us. And the only thing is just because we were born female and not male. I mean, you could also argue for, you know, race, because you're born, you know, black and not white, or whatever color, right? Whatever ethnic background. In terms of making it a more just world, equal, you know, our Constitution is based on equality for all, right? We the people. Well, it took a while for the people who wrote the Constitution, which were all white men, to actually understand, wow, we the people are actually not just privileged male, white male, right? So there's a lot of history going on. Women have always carried a huge burden, a load of it, right? And today, we can look back on the accomplishments of a lot of strong women who have brought us here. So I would like to pass it on to Alexis. Oh, and by the way, so here you guys are all going to get, this is our brochure, and you're going to get some a free museum pass. So come and visit the museum, bring your family, and learn about the strong women at Hewlett-Town Museum, which are part of what Ridgefield's history is.
Great. Okay. So, Alexis, thank you very much, Ms. Carla, for that nice overview and for passing to the museum. Now I'm going to turn over to Alexis Chisolm, who is our education manager at Connecticut Hall of Fame. Thank you. Oh, yeah, your side of it. All right, so each of you should be getting a handout. If you have a pen, you can write. If you do not have a pen, it's okay. You don't have to write, okay? If you need a pen, raise your hand and get you a pen. Okay. So I'll wait until you guys all receive your handouts, and then I'll start.
She does.
Right here? Okay. What's she's name? Yeah. We know each other's names. Tessa. The tables are getting too crowded. How about two of you come over here and sit with Layla at this table? Sure. We just don't want anybody sitting alone. Okay, anybody else need a pen?
Area.
This is fun. I'll just put it on the table.
Hello.
You
need a sheet. Oh, you didn't get a handout? What about this? Okay. All right, we'll give you a handout. All right, perfect. Okay, so again, my name is Alexis Chisolm, and I'm the Education Manager at Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame. Today we're going to talk about votes for women. So the first thing I want to discuss is women's suffrage. It seems like you guys already understand what this is about, but raise your hand if you can add some words that will help to describe the women's suffrage movement. Yeah. Go ahead. Good, so we got, it was risky, they protested and led marches, and they also could have gotten arrested for what they were doing. Yeah?
They were speaking up for what they believed that they should be able to do.
Good, so they were speaking up for themselves and other women. Yeah?
They felt oppressed by the patriarchal society, so they decided to rise up and go get the rights to vote, even though lots of women actually went against these votes because they've been brainwashed by their
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was just doing more research on the women's suffrage movement, and it was crazy how our state was even divided. with the women and who wanted the right to vote and who did not want the right to vote. But yeah, so we were fighting oppression, and women were standing up for themselves. So if you don't know about the women's suffrage movement, basically women were fighting for the right to vote. They wanted to abolish any discrimination against women just based on their gender. They wanted to be treated equally as men, be seen equally as men. So they led boycotts and protests. And finally, they won the right to vote by getting the 19th Amendment passed. All right? As we go through our presentation today, you guys have this focus question, which is also on the front sheet of your handout. The question is, how did Connecticut women help to shape our state, our nation, and our world? So as I introduce a different woman or an inductee to the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame, I want you to pay attention to her story and add a note down on how she helped our state or our nation or our world, depending on her role in the women's suffrage movement. Does anybody have any questions about what you'll be writing on the front? Perfect. If you flip to the next page, you'll see this picture in your handout. What I want you to do is to look at it closely, and if you can't really see it because it's too dark on your handout, you can definitely look on the board. I want you to think about what do you see, and if you want to discuss with the people at your table, that's fine. What do you see? What can you infer? And what questions might you have just from looking at this picture? Let's spend about a minute or so on this, all right?
Do you know who is
Hi.
They're cutting brightest.
So when I bring it back together, I want you to ask me that question. You don't have a paper.
Thank you, you're a lifesaver.
I'm still going to call right now.
I'm not going to go more right now. Susu, your mom. I want to feel
Does everyone have answers to the query, or are you still working?
I have a question.
I'm good.
I know, I don't want to have a paper. I need to paper. Actually, this one. So I really like this. Does everybody have extra paper?
Thank you. I just dyed it.
Extra paper. I'm good. It's fine. I'm not good. I have what? And it was order. What? And then drawing. We see. I see a bunch of
All right, so for the sake of time, we're going to bring it back together as a whole group. All right, raise your hand if you would like to share what you saw in this picture, okay? And so you're not making any inferences or any guesses, just what do you see? Yes, my friend all the way in the back.
question.
No, not question yet. What do you see?
I see signs in women.
Good. Signs in women, yeah?
I see people protesting.
You see people protesting? Yep.
I see a sign that says, Mr. President, how long must women face the misery of
Good.
poverty? So that's basically saying, why can't we just be and vote and try to be a president? And like, why are people laying into it? And also, why does she have a white sash? Is she wearing a backwards?
That is a good question. But we'll get to questions later.
I see that they're kind of like boycotting the president.
Good, right? So it's targeted at the president, yeah?
I noticed that they all have different things on their sashes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah?
So I did notice that the top of the sign or the banner saying Mr. President, and the name of our program is Miss President.
Ooh.
So I feel like we should kind of base what, so in school we were learning this thing about the golden circle, about what you do, how you do it, and why you do it.
Mhm.
Our why should be based off of turning that Mr. President into Mr.
noticed that they're all carrying like flag things.
Good. All right.
What are
Last
those?
two. Yes.
On their dashes, like, I think on their dashes are the names of the colleges.
Yep. So on their sashes are the name of the colleges. Ladies, I can't repeat. I love the conversation. All right. But so on their sashes are the name of the colleges that they attended. That's what you were gonna say? Good. That's a great observation. Okay. So the next thing is, what can you infer? Okay. So what can you assume from this picture? Yeah.
They were really great to go up and protest against the president.
Right. Protesting the president is crazy.
And the law that
Right. So they're protesting a law. They're protesting the president. They're really brave. Yeah.
But they're protesting to have the rights to vote, I guess.
Good. So you're inferring that they're protesting to have the right to vote.
I can because there is a gate, I can infer that they're right outside the White House.
Ooh, great inference. Yeah.
That's what I said.
I'm inferring that because it says how long must we wait for women, how must we wait for liberty? I'm inferring that they said that because they've obviously been waiting for a while and they want to just spin.
Good. Exactly. So it's been a long time and they want change. Yes.
I'm inferring that by them having their colleges that they may have gone to or their dream colleges on their sashes, like they've worked so hard to get to the point they're at now and going to college and paying for what they were learning, but now they're not able to like earn any of that back by getting to go get a job unless you're being a teacher or anything. And they may have studied something that they love in college, but it's not like usual for them to go get a different job.
Right. I love that. Right. So they have their colleges. They're obviously showing that they're educated women, and so they're saying we're educated just like men. Why can't we have the same rights? Anyone else? Yeah.
Because they're like boycotting where the president is and they're asking the president like when can we be equal to men. It shows that they really want to vote. They want to be the same as men.
Good. Exactly. Okay. So what questions do you have based on this picture? Yeah. Who is the Mr. President? I will tell you, I'm not going to answer that right now, but I will definitely tell you that through. She told you.
Wilson!
She's correct. Yeah?
Maybe, the one question that I have is, like, why would they get arrested for saying it correctly? Like, it's just,
Wait.
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah. Why are they all dressed in the same outfit? Like church coat almost. Yeah.
What year is it exactly?
What year is this? Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah, so maybe they're all dressing the same, so it shows unity, that they're the same. They're fighting for the same thing, so they are the same. Yes.
I realized that none of the women are black.
Good. So none of the women are of color.
Why is that the only one that has white and everyone else has cords on theirs? Is she
Good.
like wearing backwards?
Maybe, or maybe she didn't attend the college, right? All right. So hopefully through my presentation, I can answer some of these questions. I will tell you exactly which one of our inductees had something to do with these protests. And through her story, I hope to answer as many questions as I possibly can. If I do not happen to answer your question, if we have time at the end, you ask your question and I will answer it. So I want to start by talking about America 300 years ago, okay? So 300 years ago is when the Europeans first settled in North America. And they were first introduced to the Iroquois Native Americans. And what they learned was that the way that the Iroquois lived and conducted their communities and society was very different from what the English were used to. Actually, the Iroquois women had the right to vote and choose who would be the leader of their tribes, which was very different from what English women were used to. when the English came to America, they actually continued this law called the Doctrine of Cohort, which basically said that women were protected or covered by the rights that her husband had. So women weren't allowed to vote because their husbands did that for them. Women weren't allowed to own property because their husbands did that for them. And so that was all under this law right here, which obviously was changed later on. One of the women who worked hard to make sure she could change pieces of that law was Isabella Beecher Hooker. So this woman is fascinating because she helped to create the Connecticut Women's Suffrage Association. And not only that, but she also became interested in women's rights because one random day when she was reading to her husband who was going blind, they were reading a law book, and she realized that under Connecticut state law, women were not allowed to own property separate from their husband, okay? And so she spent a good 7 years lobbying to the Connecticut government to pass a law that allowed married women to own their own property. And she was successful in that, and in 1877, Connecticut passed a married woman's property bill, allowing married women to own property. All right. After that, she spent a lot of time working on the national level. So she worked with women like, I don't want to screw up anyone's name. She worked with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony on the National Women's Suffrage Movement. And she helped them, and she paid for a lot of the conferences that they held so that they can get more women involved in the women's suffrage movement all over the country. Not only did she help around the country, but she also inspired 2 Connecticut women from Glastonbury. These 2 women were actually sisters named Julia and Abby Smith. And the way that I refer to them is kind of as the grandmothers of the women's suffrage movement in Connecticut. Okay? These 2 women, they lived together in a house in Glastonbury. They called their house the Kimberly Mansion. One year, Glastonbury decided that they were going to impose a special tax on these women. So if you were a single woman and you owned property, you now had to pay even more property tax. Abby and Julia didn't think it was fair, okay, because they're just like, one, we're women who don't even get a say on what's happening in this town, and 2, if everyone else doesn't have to pay this tax, then why do we have to pay this tax? And so the sisters refused to pay the tax. They actually attended several town meetings where they were denied being able to speak up for themselves and get things to change. And so what they would do is they would pull carts to the middle of the town green and give these speeches so that everyone in the town understood that they were being charged extra just for being women and living alone. What happened was that the town actually decided to take their cows. So if they weren't going to pay the tax, then the town was going to take something that belonged to them. So they took all of their cows, I believe it was like 7 cows, and they decided to hold an auction and allow anyone in the town to purchase their cows, except for women. So Abby and Julia could not buy their cows back. So what they did was they gave a neighbor $100 so that he could go to the auction and buy the cows back. Because they gave these speeches and everyone knew that what the town was doing was wrong, no one else even bid on the cows. So the guy was able to buy all 7 cows back for $100. The following year, the town decided again to charge them an extra tax, and the sisters again refused to pay that tax. This time, the town actually sold a piece of their land. And the sisters had to go to court. Finally, they reached a point in court where they appealed the decision and they were able to get their land back. But by that point, this story spread all over the country, and a lot of women were rallying behind the Smiths of Glastonbury, and they decided also that they wanted to stand up in their own communities for women's rights. The next 2 people that I'm going to introduce you to also use their voices, but in a very different way. So you guys have probably heard of Alice Paul. She was an important figure in the women's suffrage movement, and she actually created the National Women's Party. when she was younger, she decided to study in England, and during that time while she was studying, women in England were actually going through a suffrage movement of their own. But she noticed that they were a little bit more radical. So they were throwing rocks, they were starting fires, they were doing anything to get national attention. And so Alice Paul decided that when she came back to America, she wanted to do those same things. But the women, a part of the national movement, did not want to be that radical. They didn't want to start trouble, they just wanted to peacefully get the right to vote. So Alice Paul had to create the National Women's Party. And that picture that you saw in your handout is actually Alice Paul and a lot of her fellow women who decided to be radicals and protest in front of the White House. And they led their protests actually during World War I. So this was during 1917 when the country was kind of focused on the war. These women did not let up. They decided that even though we're fighting in the war, we also need to make sure that we have equality back home. And so they led these protests. One interesting thing that I found out through research this week was that some other Connecticut women joined Alice Paul, and they actually used Connecticut logs to start some fires. And in those fires, they were burning President Wilson's speeches because they wanted to get his attention and they wanted him to support the suffrage movement, which he was kind of wary of doing. So those women were arrested, okay? And I think it was about 13 or so Connecticut women who were arrested during this time. And Alice Paul had been arrested 7 different times and put into prison 3 times. While in prison, she decided to go on a hunger strike, and she decided not to eat at all. But the prison decided to force feed her anyway. And that got national attention, and people realized that these women just want the right to vote. Like, we cannot treat them terribly because they want equal rights. And because of Alice Paul, the movement got even more attention, and people started to pay attention to what women were really asking for. So as the movement got larger, it became very clear who was left out of the movement. And Black women were not included in the national women's suffrage movement. So there were many women across the nation, like Mary Townsend Seymour, who fought specifically for African American women to have the right to vote also. So this is a picture of the National Colored Women Voters Organization, and they had to organize on their own to make sure that they would also have the right to vote. In your handout, if you go to the 3rd page, there's a little reading. We're just going to read what's in the gray box, okay? If you have time later, you can read the whole thing. So this is an excerpt from Audacious Alliance, Mary Townsend Seymour. On February 18, 1919, the World quoted Alice Paul's remarks regarding the intention of Negro women in Carolina to vote if the 19th Amendment were passed. Paul reaffirmed that if passed, the amendment would not enfranchise these women. We are organizing the white women in South Carolina, but have heard of no activity or anxiety among the Negresses. The article inflamed Mary Seymour so much that she wrote to Paul demanding an explanation and called the NAACP headquarters. As a result, the NAACP national leaders did ask Alice Paul and the National Women's Suffrage Association to clarify their stance on votes for African American women, but their responses were evasive and unsatisfactory. So, as you can see, at this time, the national movement wanted to ensure that women would get the right to vote, and so they thought it would be popular or easiest if they excluded African American women. Yeah, quick question.
Did not question, but something that I noticed. Well, it's also a question. On the picture up in the corner, there's a man.
Yeah.
It's a black man, and I'm wondering why is he helping women if men were against women?
Well, okay, so that's like with anything, right? There's going to be people who want to help, right? You have allies who belong to a different group who want to help you reach your goal. So women wanted the right to vote, but not all men thought that women should not have the right to vote. it was the government, and the government at the time was run by men. So those powerful men in particular didn't want women to have the right to vote. But there were individual men who wanted to help women, okay? So
why is there only one person there?
I'm not sure why there's only one man here, but yeah.
I have a but maybe an answer for you. That photo might be cropped, or actually like just people on the side.
Right. Or this could just be like one meeting that people showed up to and they took a photo. All right. So on the bottom of this reading, there is a question. Why was it important for all women to receive the right to vote? So if you want to jot down something, you can, but I would like some hands. So if you have an idea, why do you think it was important for all women to receive the right to vote, not just white women? Yeah.
I think it was important because if you're going to give the right to white women to vote, then that's increasing the amount of equality, but not quite enough that they're satisfactory.
Right.
They're all going to get upset even more because you did it for some people and not all.
Right.
So if you did it for both of them at the same time, I think if you made that satisfactory level, like it wouldn't be totally satisfying for them. It wouldn't be all that they ever wanted, but it would definitely be something.
I agree, right? If we're fighting for equality, we might as well fight for everyone and not just one half. You got something else to add? Oh, I'm sorry. See, we're connected, I believe. All right, so after Mary Townsend Seymour speaking up for African American women, other African American women across the country also began to speak up and demanded to be included in this movement. And so in 1920, when the 19th Amendment was written and ratified, all women finally received the right to vote. Okay? So this was a victorious moment for women all across the country finally having that right to go to the ballot and cast a vote. Alice Paul particularly was happy, but she also wanted more. So she drafted a new amendment called the Equal Rights Amendment, and you have it on the back of your handout if you want to look at it closely and read it. It says, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. And then we have a quote from her. She said, men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States in every place subject to its jurisdiction. What do you guys think Alice Paul was arguing for? What does she want? Yeah.
Just because they have the right to vote doesn't mean that they would be equal in every other place, so she wants to make sure it would be equal.
Right, so that included equal pay, equal access to education, jobs, housing, etc., etc. So she wanted to have this new amendment that would cover equality for everyone, everywhere in America. However, even though she wrote this in 1923, it has never been ratified, so it has not been put into law, okay? So let's go back to our focus question from the front of your handout. It said, how did Connecticut women help to shape our state, our nation, and our world? All right, let's start with our first inductee, Isabella Beecher Hooker. Who can tell me how she helped? Yeah. Suffrage. Good. Yeah.
She created the stepping stones for future suffragists by lobbying to pass the Connecticut law allowing married women on property, and she met with like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony to discuss their movement as well.
Good. All right, our other inductee or inductees, the Smiths of Glastonbury. How did they help? Yeah.
I said they fought for their land and cows in separate ways, like asking favors from other people, and they fought against their extra taxes because they knew it wasn't right and it wasn't fair for them.
Good.
They stood up for what they believed.
Exactly. What about Alice Paul? How does she help?
She kind of demanded what she wanted, and then she got thrown in jail for it, and then demanded it more because you can't have people dying in prison.
Right.
That doesn't show well.
Exactly.
She kind of output for, yeah.
She didn't die in prison.
No, she didn't, but it
She would have died if they hadn't forced feeding.
It created this image that what was happening in America was just so crazy that it didn't even seem like it was America, and the president had to respond at that point because everyone found out. You know, these women were being treated unfairly, they were in prison, they weren't eating, they were being forced to eat, and it just did not look right on a national level. Yeah.
She created the National Woman Party and ran it at the White House in World War I.
Good. Exactly. So she led her protest during World War I, right in front of the White House. All right, and our last inductee was Mary Townsend Seymour. How did she help?
She did what other suffragist groups did and fought for African American women's rights to vote, as well as she fought for all women's rights to vote, basically, and equal voting rights rather than just specific races.
Exactly. And when she included all women, she wasn't just fighting for black women or white women, she was fighting for all. That obviously helped America become a better place. And as you all know, America is a country that a lot of other countries look up to, and so we are a role model. And so when we allowed all women to vote in the 1920s, that created this image across the globe that women should be treated equally, and so other countries began doing the same thing. Just before we end, I have a couple other questions. So do you guys think it was right for the National Women's Party to continue to push for women's rights during the war? So World War I was also occurring when Alice Paul was leading those crazy protests in front of the White House. Yeah.
Yes, but even though there was a war, even though there was a war going on at the time, women's rights was still an important subject in that era. So even though there was something was still going on, there still had to come up to fight for the quote-unquote lesser.
Exactly. I agree. Yeah, you want to add to it?
Yeah, so basically when the men are off fighting, the women are the ones left, and so they're saying, well, you're going to go send the men away to fight. We're still here. We should have the right to vote, because the only people who are going to be voting are the ones who can't fight, and it's a very small minority. So
I agree. Go ahead.
So, because there's a war going on, they shouldn't just say, okay, there's a war going on. That means that we should stop for right now. Because you could think that the war is more important than women not being able to vote, but it doesn't matter which subject is more important. It just matters that they're both problems and that they need to end.
Exactly. I agree. Imagine if women stopped fighting at that time, you know? Would we have the right to vote today? Yeah.
I agree with you because it was kind of, people thought they were just going to put it to rest, like, yes, there's a war going on, but that doesn't mean you can just set it aside for that time. You have to take charge, and more than ever, they have to do it during that time to show they feel the weakness and they want it. It's going to happen.
I agree. Go ahead.
So I'm agreeing with Gigi and Audrey that, so I know that World War I actually lasted for a long time. So if they actually put aside the things that the women were protesting, it would actually been a lot longer for the women to be able to vote.
Right. Exactly. Okay. I just want to thank you all for coming. If you ever want to find out more about Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame or all of the women who are in our Hall of Fame, you can go to our website. So there are 121 inductees in our Hall of Fame, and each year we induct 3 more. So you can go to our website, read their stories, find women who are truly inspiring to you. We have women who have worked in, obviously, politics, women who have played sports. All different fields are covered, so I definitely want you guys to check that out, okay? Thank you all.